This is a story about a boy named Glen and a dog named Sport. Glen was like a lot of other boys and girls, except for one thing. He wasn't happy. It seemed to him as though everyone was against him. Nobody wanted him to have any fun. Glen felt he had just one friend in the whole world, Sport. That day when he and Sport had Mrs. Norton's cat up a tree, they were just beginning to have some fun, throwing rocks. When Mrs. Norton had come out and scolded him severely. Yes, sir, Mrs. Norton had said some things to Glen that made him feel pretty bad. And the time Glen's mother had asked him to rake the yard. He just didn't seem to feel like working that day. What's the use of cleaning up the yard anyway? Just get messed up again in a couple of days. Besides, there was a construction project down in the next block that needed looking into. When Glen and Sport finally had come home, it was almost time for dinner, and the yard hadn't been raked. From the way Glen's mother talked to him, he began to think that even she didn't like him anymore. But what made Glen feel worst of all was that day when he'd wanted to play ball with the kids. But do you think they'd let him? No, they wouldn't. They told him to go on and mind his own business. He wasn't going to play ball with them. Yes, Glen was a very unhappy boy. That very night, while his mother and father were away, Glen sneaked a whole pint of ice cream out of the refrigerator and took it up to his room. His mother had bought the ice cream for a party the next day. But Glen was hungry, and that was much more important to him. He'd found some pickles, too, so he ate those. Yes, sir, Glen ate a whole pint of ice cream and almost half a jar of pickles before he went to bed. It's no Glen didn't sleep very well that night. It might have been the pickles or the ice cream, or maybe it was something else. But right then, it happened. Right there in Glen's bedroom was a strange man, someone he'd never even seen before. At first, Glen was pretty scared, but the man seemed friendly.
Hello?
Who are you?
Well, Glen, why don't you just call me Mr. X?
Well, what do you want?
Well, I hear you've been having some trouble lately, and I just dropped in to see if I could be of any help. Now, what seems to be the matter?
Well, it's just that nobody seems to like me anymore. I guess that's the trouble. I don't seem to have any fun. Everybody's against me.
Glen and Mr. X talked for a long, long time that night, and the next morning, Glen did what was for him a very strange thing. He went over to Mrs. Norton's house. And he told her how sorry he was that he'd been so mean to her cat. And stranger yet, Mrs. Norton, instead of still being angry, invited him in for a cookie. After eating just one cookie, Glen rushed home and started to rake the yard. He pretended not to see his mother looking out the window and smiling, but he knew she was there just the same. It was a funny thing, but Glen felt better out there with all that work to do just because he'd made his mother feel so good. He felt happier than he had for a long, long time. Right after he'd finished raking the yard, Glen rushed down to the ball diamond. As luck would have it, one team was short, so they decided to give Glen another chance. And did he play fair? For the first time in his life, Glen didn't break even one little rule. You see, that's the reason the boys wouldn't let him play before. He always cheated. But not this time, no sir. Glen played fair and square all the way through. And was he happy? Well. But what was it that brought about this marvelous change in Glen? Why had he become so different? It was all because of this mysterious Mr. X. You see, Mr. X had told Glen some things that night in the bedroom that made him look at himself a whole lot differently. Mr. X called it being a good citizen.
Glen, if you want people to like you, you've got to make them like you. And the amazing part of it is you don't have to do anything big or wonderful. No, it's the little things that count. Things like brushing your teeth every morning without having to be told. Things like putting your belongings away when you're through with them. Like doing your share at home. Being cheerful when there's something that has to be done. Of course, being a good citizen means obeying the laws of our town and our country. It means working together, talking things over. It means deciding things by majority rule, or doing what most of the people want to do. Accepting the decision of the majority, even though you might want to do something different. Being a good citizen means taking turns at play and at work, too. It means being kind and understanding to people, and especially to people less fortunate than ourselves. A good citizen knows that even though someone may act different, down underneath where it really counts, he's just like everyone else. A good citizen is friendly and helpful all the time. No, we don't have to wait till we grow up and vote to become citizens. When we're very young, we're just citizens of our own home, our own family. And as we grow, we become citizens of our school, our town, our state, our country. And finally, we become citizens of the world, applying our principles of good citizenship to our dealings with other nations.
Yes, Glen and Mr. X talked about a lot of interesting things that night, but the strangest part was yet to come. When Mr. X had finished telling Glen about all this, he stood up, and then he just disappeared. The next morning, Glen thought a lot about what Mr. X had told him, and he decided that the way for him to be happy was to be a good citizen. He'd try it for a while anyway. Maybe it would work. Well, you already know the rest of the story. That first day, Glen found that he was happier than he ever thought he could be. Everyone seemed to like him so much better because he was trying so hard to be a good citizen. And it's a funny thing, but sports seemed a lot more popular with the other dogs after that. Do you suppose he could have been listening to Mr. X, too?